Hi everybody, thank you for coming. And first I just want to announce the dedications. Once again, a Refuah Shlema for NATAH Ben Zeisel, and for the liberation of Eretz Yisrael from its enemies, safe return home of our soldiers and our hostages, the lasting unity of the people of Israel, and for all those whose health has been affected by the war. And in particular, we also want to pray for the release of Arvin Netanel ben Sonia in Iran, who is unfortunately a young man who is under a death sentence, and B'ezrat Hashem, we hope that he will be freed. Aliyat Neshamah for Yitzchak Hirsh ben Eliezer. As always, we're very grateful to the people who support Torah. This is a hard week to figure out what to talk about because there are so many different things. We have, of course, the holiday of Shavuos coming up next week, which is why we're not having a shir next week. We have the Parsha of the week, the first Parsha of Bamidbar, which actually has some very interesting points that I wanted to talk about. And we have 28th of Iyar, tomorrow. We have the 57th anniversary of the liberation of Yerushalayim in the Six-Day War. People who are old like me do remember 1967. I was a little boy, but I do remember it. And the very stirring words of Matzagor, one of the generals, Har Habayit Biyadenu, the Temple Mount is in our hands. And the euphoria was so great that many, many people genuinely believed that Mashiach was coming. Because after all, you redeemed the Temple Mount. You're able to have access to all of Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim, as David HaMelech says, Habenuyah, the rebuilt Jerusalem, Ke'ir shechubra la yachtav, a city that has been connected in all ways. And many people did think Mashiach would be coming, and that is why in Eretz Yisrael at the time, there was a tremendous arousal towards tshuva. In fact, all of the Balei Tshuva Yeshivot, or Sameach, Eish, a little later, they all started essentially in the aftermath of the Six-Day War, which created a great, great wave of tshuva. Now, unfortunately, what often happens is opposite forces are generated at the same time. Meaning, some people saw in the Six-Day War the powerful hand of God, and they said, there's no way we could have done it without Hashem. And therefore, even a secular person turned to Torah and mitzvot to be connected to Hashem. But then, unfortunately, there is sometimes a counter-reaction, which the Torah itself warns us about. Kochi v'yotzim yadi, my power. We have the greatest army. We're able to defeat those, 25 Arab nations. And as a result, in some circles, it turned into our hubris, our invincibility, the fact that we really know. Now, we're not prophets, and it's not really for us to prognosticate as to why things happened. But a few years after the Six-Day War, 6 years later, was the tragic Yom Kippur War, which in many, many ways, although Baruch Hashem, we survived, but in many, many ways, it was a very, very tragic debacle in which there were many, many casualties, and Israel was in grave danger. And at least some of the sages identified that as the necessary corrective to some of the arrogance that was generated in the aftermath of the Six-Day War, to remind us that we are not in charge of our fate, that without HaKadosh Baruch Hu, our great, powerful army, as important as it is, and as grateful as we have to be for it being here. And God forbid, I'm not disparaging that at all, but we have to realize without HaKadosh Baruch Hu, none of these systems are going to work. And I've said repeatedly that in some ways, that is also one of the lessons of October 7. To this day, it is still not clear as a logical matter how Hamas could have breached the security systems that were in place. It made no sense. You had the border wall, and you had the security systems, and the alarm systems, and the motion detectors, and everything else. And Hamas did not have sophisticated weapons. They had trucks and tractors, basically. and somehow they're able to crash through all of these systems. They're not detected for several hours. It made no sense. It makes no sense because, Israel does have the best military security systems in the world. And in many, many ways, I don't know if I would use the word miracle because it's not a good thing, but in many, many ways, it was almost a miracle that massacre could happen. It doesn't make sense. But sometimes, unfortunately, we have to learn our lesson of not being smug and not being arrogant and realizing that we need Hashem to take us through this. But no matter what, whether you look at 73 or look at October 7, the one incontestable fact is that in 1967, something very beautiful happened. The ability to have all of Yerushalayim as a belonging to the Jewish people and as a place where we could serve Hashem. We don't have the Beis HaMikdash yet. Remember, the Kotel is not the Beit HaMikdash. It's not even a wall of the Beit HaMikdash. It is simply a wall of the outer courtyard. And on the Har HaBayit, we don't have a temple, and instead we have mosques and various other things. And we're not even allowed, putting aside halachic issues, we're not even allowed to have a shul on the Temple Mount. Again, I'm putting aside the halachic issue. Are you allowed to go to the Temple Mount? But assuming you're allowed to go, you're not allowed to have a shul, not allowed to have a minyan. So the Galut is very much still here, even in Jerusalem, and even on the Temple Mount, and maybe especially there. But at the same time, we have to be grateful that we have Yerushalayim, and what a wonderful, wonderful thing it is. So this is something to be grateful for. So whether you do it by saying Hallel with a bracha, or Hallel without a bracha, or you don't say Hallel because it's not one of the liturgical days, these are, I think, secondary questions in many, many ways. Because the ultimate emotion is one of Hakaras Hatov. And that's something we need, because when we're grateful to Hashem for the chesed, that opens up more avenues of chesed to keep on coming. When we don't appreciate the good things that Hashem puts in our lives, so Hashem might say, okay, you don't appreciate it, I won't give them to you. So these are some of the things we think about Yom Yerushalayim. Let me just mention a few observations about Jerusalem, interestingly enough. The Rambam makes two fascinating points about Yerushalayim. First of all, in the Torah, whenever the Torah talks about building a sanctuary in Jerusalem, when you come to the land, you'll build a sanctuary, it never mentions Jerusalem as a city. It always says, Hamakom asher yivchar Hashem. You will bring these sacrifices in the place that God will choose, which is a reference to Yerushalayim, but Yerushalayim is not referred to by a designated name. In fact, that is why the Beis HaMikdash is called, in the Dayenu and in other places, in fact, in the Rambam, Beit HaBechira, the house that is chosen. That's one of the terms for Beis HaMikdash, and that's connected to the term Asher Yivchar Hashem. So point number one is, why does the Torah keep it a secret? The Torah does not reveal that Yerushalayim will be the site of the Beis HaMikdash. It's as if to say, the place that I'll tell you about later. So the Rambam gives a fascinating reason. The Rambam says, Hashem did not want to reveal the site of the temple until after all of Eretz Yisrael was conquered and divided among the tribes. Because the way it works now is Yerushalayim is essentially divided tribally between the tribe of Binyamin and the tribe of Yehuda. Now, there is actually a machlokas of the Gemara how that works. Certainly, geographically, Yerushalayim is situated between Binyamin and Yehuda. But some say it does not belong to tribes. It's like Lahavdil, the District of Columbia, which is national. So some say you don't look at Jerusalem as belonging to Yehuda or Binyamin. Yerushalayim belongs to Klal Yisrael. But either way, it is carved out of Yehuda and Binyamin. And in fact, the Beis HaMikdash itself is that way. When you go east to west from the main entrance to the Holy of Holies, the eastern part of the temple is in the Chelek of Yehuda. The Kodesh HaKadoshim and the like are in the Chelek of Binyamin. Like it straddles. It's like those pictures of a public library in Vermont that's on the Canadian border. So the border is apparently, I've seen pictures, is the middle of the library. So if you're reading at a certain table, which is on the U.S. side, and you got to check out the book on the Canadian side, you got to go through a border check, in the library itself. So lahavdil, the Beis Hamikdash is the same thing. In the middle of the Beis Hamikdash is division in Yehuda and Binyamin. So here's what the Rambam says. If God would have said where Yerushalayim was, the other tribes would never have agreed to the division of the land, because each tribe would have wanted that city. So as a result, God did not reveal the holiness of Jerusalem until after the land was already divided, and as a result, the division had been accepted. Otherwise, it would not have been accepted. That's one reason. And the Rambam gives a related reason, that had the Umot HaOlam known of the sanctity of Jerusalem, they would have fought much more ferociously not to give it up, just as we see today. And therefore, God wanted the nations to be oblivious of the holiness of Yerushalayim. And that's why it's called Hamakom Yeshivcha Hashem, because that would take away some of the ferocity in the wars against the Jewish people who were trying to conquer Jerusalem. So that's the point the Rambam makes, why Yerushalayim is not referred to directly. It is only called Hamakom Yeshivcha Hashem. He makes another interesting point, and that is, it's clear that Yerushalayim as a city was conquered. Right? It was conquered. Now, the actual story of the conquest of Yerushalayim, if I were to ask you, show me in Tanakh when and where Yerushalayim was conquered, it'll be a little confusing, because part of a conquest is in the book of Yoshua, part of it is in the book of Shoftim, part of it is in the days of David HaMelech, and there's even something that's afterwards, meaning different parts of the city were conquered at different times. So the notion when the municipality celebrated the 3,000th anniversary of the city, they were counting it from David HaMelech's conquest. But in truth, there were earlier, at least partial conquests. So Yerushalayim was a conquered city. I mean, we conquered it. But what's interesting is that when David HaMelech finally had a prophetic revelation that the Beis HaMikdash, which he was not allowed to build, David could not build the Beis HaMikdash because he was a man of war, but he was given a prophetic revelation where the site of the Beis HaMikdash was, on Mount Moriah, where Abraham was prepared to sacrifice Yitzchak. So you'll notice that that part, the place of the Mikdash, was the threshing floor of a Yevusi whose name was Aravna. Aravna the Jebusite. Aravna HaYevusi. And what did David do? David collected money from all of the tribes to buy the Makom HaMikdash. Now, this is also anomalous, because after all, if Yerushalayim is under Jewish sovereignty, why does David have to purchase the site of the temple? So here too, the Rambam makes a fascinating point. He says that because the Beis HaMikdash is a city, is something that represents divine peace in the world, and which is why David could not build the Beis HaMikdash, because he was a man of war. The Makom HaMikdash can only be sanctified by consensual purchase and not by military conquest. So yeah, the city of Jerusalem could be conquered. The Makom HaMikdash must be through peaceful negotiation. Now this has some very, very interesting political ramifications. I don't want to fully explore them right now. But there is a notion, part of the argument of why don't we build a temple today? There are many different aspects of this, but one aspect is that the Beis HaMikdash has to be built in a context of shalom, and not in a context of the imposition of military conquest, just as David HaMelech had to buy the Har HaBayit, and he could not rely on the conquest of Yerushalayim as a whole. Okay. Now, again, just a few other general points about Yerushalayim to think about. In Tanakh, Yerushalayim is mentioned, well, in the Torah, it's not mentioned at all, except as Shalem, which I'll get to. But Yerushalayim is not mentioned in the Torah. But in Tanakh, in Nevi'im and Kesuvim, it is mentioned some 600 times. And it's been well pointed out that in the Quran, it is not mentioned at all. So somehow Jerusalem became a really holy city in Islam, but that's a much, much later development. But it's interesting that in the Nach, Yerushalayim is often, most of the time, not spelt with the second yud. So you would read it Yerushalem, which actually corresponds to the English pronunciation, Jerusalem. In other words, it doesn't have that second yud. It's not Yerushalayim, but it's Yerushalem. What is the significance of that? So here's the interesting thing. We know that Yud Mem, the Yim thing, is a common Hebrew suffix for plural. So Yad is a hand, Yodayim, hands. Regel is a foot, Raglayim. Ayin is an eye, Einayim. Ozen is an ear, Oznayim. So Yerushalayim could be understood as two Jerusalems, meaning the city's name is Yerushalem. Yerushalayim is two of them. Now, what are the two? Well, you might be tempted to say East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem, but that doesn't count because we don't consider that two to begin with. That's just one. But we say there's an earthly Yerushalayim and a heavenly Yerushalayim. And when the earthly Yerushalayim is in alignment with the heavenly Jerusalem, that is when we have redemption and divine blessing. When the earthly Yerushalayim is not in alignment with the heavenly Yerushalayim, that's when you have machlokes, sinat chinam, galut, all of the negative things that happen. Our job, so to speak, is to move the earthly city to be in alignment with the heavenly city. And thus Yerushalayim are the two Jerusalems. Now it's interesting talking about East and West. I don't know if you heard this. Ben Gurion in 1967 was so almost fanatically committed to unifying the city that he was seriously considering tearing down the wall of the old city. He says, why should there be a wall? From a secular perspective, there may be some point to that, but he was talked out of it just for historical reasons. You don't destroy some historical artifact that dates at least from the 15th century or the like. But he said, turn down the wall, like the Berlin Wall. Why have walls in Jerusalem at all? But the Yerushalayim is Yerushalayim Shel Mala, Yerushalayim Shel Mata. Now, I had mentioned that Yerushalayim is not mentioned in the Torah, but there is a city, Shalem, that's mentioned. Salem, Shalem. Now remember when Avraham Avinu waged war against the four major kings who took Lot captive, and he was victorious against those kings. And it mentions Malchi Tzedek, the king of Shalem, brought forth to Abraham lechem v'yayin, bread and wine. Fuhu kohen lakel elyon. And Malchi Tzedek was a Kohen, not from Aaron, but he was a high priest to Hashem, and he gave Abraham a blessing. Now, Chazal give us a fascinating backstory here. They actually say Malchi Tzedek was not his name. This is none other than Shem, the son of Noach, who's very old, which happens to be Avram's great-great-great-great-grandfather. Shem, the son of Noach. And Shem was regarded as kind of the spiritual leader of the Noahide world. And the reason he was called Malchi Tzedek, king of righteousness or justice, because all of the kings of Jerusalem were given the title Malchi Tzedek. Just like all of the kings of Egypt were called Paros, whatever Paro means, but the kings of Shalem. Now Shalem was the original name of Jerusalem. I have to say, l'chayra, that this seems to contradict the Rambam's point, because the Rambam made the point, you'll remember, that the Torah does not mention Yerushalayim, so the nations should not know that it was a holy city, otherwise they would fight with great ferocity. But l'chayra, according to the interpretation I'm telling you now, Shalem was already known as a holy city, ad kedei kach, that the kings of Shalem were given the honorific title of Malchi Tzedek, kings of righteousness, which indicates that the holiness of Jerusalem was known. So the original name of the city was Shalem. So where do we get the Yeru? So listen to this explanation. Just like you have Minneapolis and St. Paul, twin cities, or Kansas City, Kansas, Kansas City, Missouri, kind of twin cities. Jerusalem was also a twin city. The main city was called Shalem, but then you have Har HaMoriah, Mount Moriah, the Temple Mount, that at least from Avram's time, not at the time of Malchi Tzedek. In Malchi Tzedek's time, before the Akedah, it was just Shalem. But later, when Avram was willing to sacrifice Yitzchak, so Har HaMoriah got a new name. What does the Torah say? Avram called the place Hashem Yireh, Vayikra Avram Lamakam Ahu Hashem Yireh, Asher Ye'omer Hayom. I'm going to do a little translation here. And it is said today, Bahar Hashem Yera'eh, in the mountain of God, he shall be seen. So let's just parse that verse for a moment. Avraham called Har HaMoriah, which apparently was its original name, he called it Hashem Yireh, or Yireh for short, Yireh. God will see. What does it mean, God will see? So Avram is declaring, my willingness to give up everything for Hashem, and Yitzchak's willingness to give up his life for Hashem, shall be an eternal source of merit and blessing to the Jewish people. Kav Yachol, God will gaze down at this mountain and be reminded of the Akedah. Hashem Yireh, Hashem will see. Now, there's again, it's an anthropomorphic expression. He will look at this mountain and remember what we did today. Now, that's Yireh. But then it says, Asher Ye'omer Hayom, it shall be said, or it will be said on that day, in the mountain God will be seen. So Yireh and Yera'eh are two very different words, although they have the same root. Yireh is God will see. Yera'eh is God will be seen. So what is that a reference to? So the Medrash says, Asher Ye'omer Hayom, it shall be said in that day. That day refers to Mashiach. Bayom Ahu, in the day of Hashem Echad, Ushmo Echad, God's ways will be seen. We will understand the ways of God. Meaning, in this world, God sees us, but we don't see God. Meaning, we don't understand the Darchei Hashem. But on the day of Hayom, God's ways will be understood by us as well. We will, again, we mentioned this a number of times, the idea that in this world we have chesed and we have gevura, we have punishment and we have compassion. But then it will be revealed that even the punishment was for our compassion, for our good, for our rectification, for our tikkun. Which means to say, Mount Moriah today would be called Yireh. God sees. When Mashiach comes, it'll be Yera'eh. God will be seen. I don't mean seen in a physical way, but his ways will be understood. Okay. But be it as it may, therefore, from the Akedah onward, Har HaMoriah was called Yireh. He will see. So now it turns out that there are two parts to the city of Jerusalem. The main city is Shalem, and the Temple Mount is Yireh. Minneapolis, St. Paul. So combine Yireh, Shalem. Close, it's not quite there yet. Yireh Shalem is Yerushalayim. But you'll ask me, Yireh is Yud Resh Aleph Hey. Yeru is Yud Resh Vav. Well, you may not like the answer, but some say the gematria of Aleph and Hey are in fact 6. So Vav is a contraction of the Aleph and Hey. So Yeru Shalem is Yireh, Temple Mount, plus Shalem. So that gets you Yerushalem. And the Yerushalayim, I already said, comes from the two Jerusalems, Yerushalayim Shalmala and Yerushalayim Shalmata. Kind of the evolution of the name. Again, this is, I believe, a very, very good shot, except for the fact, as I say, it's hard to reconcile this with the Rambam's idea that the holiness of the city was not known to outsiders till David HaMelech's time, given the fact that we already see there was a holiness that was known to Shem and the kings of Jerusalem that were called Malchi Tzedek. So the final aspect of this I want to bring out is that, so we have the two names. Yerushalayim, therefore, is a composite city. Yireh, Shalem. Temple Mount is Yireh. The rest of the city is Shalem. Yireh, Shalem is Yerushalem. And with Yerushalayim Shalmala, it becomes Yerushalayim. Now, Yireh, obviously in the context of the Pasuk, means God will see. He will see. Right? That's what it means. He'll look down at the Temple Mount, see the Akedah, so to speak, and that will be a source of eternal merit for Am Yisrael. But what's interesting is the letters for the verb Yireh are the same as the noun Yirah. Yirah is fear of God, like Yiras Hashem. Right? Yud, Resh, Aleph, Hey. As a verb, Yireh, he will see. As a noun, Yirah, fear, reverence, or awe. So what you find in the Midrashim, therefore, in spite of the fact that the Torah clearly is using Yireh in the sense of a verb, but the fact that it can also refer to the notion of Yirat Hashem is a secondary explanation that Jerusalem is the city of reverence for God, the city of awe, the city of Yirat Hashem. So building on that, once again, this takes us back to a theme that we've already spoken about several times during the period of the Omer, and yet it keeps on coming back. And that is, Yireh and Shalem embodies two contradictory ideas, both of which are part of our beloved city. And it's something we have to grapple with. How do we straddle the contradictions? You know, there's an old tradition based on the Mekubalim that there are all of Eretz Yisrael is holy, but there are 4 cities that are the holiest cities of Eretz Yisrael. There's Yerushalayim, there's Hebron, there's Tzfat, and there's Tiberia. They are traditionally called the 4 holy cities of Eretz Yisrael. The Mekubalim connect them to the 4 elements. we have four elements. We have fire, we have water, we have wind, we have dirt. Right? These are the four Yesodot. So they connect them this way. Yerushalayim is the city of fire. Hebron, which is a cemetery, Marat HaMachpelah, is the city of dirt. Tiberia, on Yam Kinneret, is the city of water. And Tzvat, which is ethereal, mystical, so to speak, is the city of air, wind. Right? In Yiddish, we have an expression for a person who is kind of not quite in this world. He's living in a world of his own. A Luftmensch, that means a man in the air, a person who's not grounded. Now, the Mefarshim explain that these four Yesodot can be directed in positive ways or negative ways. Let's take fire. Fire, in a positive sense, like Eish HaTorah, fire, passion, excitement, commitment, fervor, enthusiasm, right? I'm on fire. That's good Eish. Bad Eish, machlokas, sinas chinam, anger, losing your temper. That's bad Eish. Right? The Eish could be direct. The Kayach HaEish could go in a good way. The Kayach HaEish could go in a bad way. Dirt. Dirt, in a proper perspective, is the source of humility, submission, modesty, lack of pretentiousness. That's good. We say in the Amidah, may I be like dirt to all who insult me, meaning to say, not to take it seriously. On the other hand, when your dirt turns into self-loathing, when it turns into a sense of worthlessness, a lack of healthy self-esteem, then it becomes very destructive because you'll never do what you need to do because you think you're ineffectual. So just like fire, there's good fire and bad fire. There's good dirt and there's bad dirt. There's healthy, proper humility, and then there is self-loathing and despair, which is no good. Water. Water is connected to the sense of pleasure and joy in life. So water, refreshing, giving life. On the other hand, it could also reflect hedonism and just spending your life devoted to taivas and whatever's going on. Right? So once again, there needs to be a balance. And then air. Air can be connected to healthy self-esteem. In many ways, air is the opposite of dirt. Dirt is low, air goes up. Healthy self-esteem, but the negative could be arrogance. So the point is, the four cities of Eretz Yisrael, which are connected to the four elements, have potentialities for good and potentialities for bad, because the element within which the city is rooted can be used for good or for bad. So I'm going to focus, because it's Yom Yerushalayim, I am going to focus on Jerusalem in particular. This is the city of fire. So what does that mean? In this city, you will find passion. You will find enthusiasm. You will find commitment. You will also find machlokas. You will often find animosities. You will often find polarization. Right? There's the good fire, there's the bad fire. So Yira represents the fire of Yerushalayim, which hopefully will be directed towards fear of God. I don't mean scared, being scared. This is awe, reverence, doing mitzvos, learning Torah. But it has to be counterbalanced with the other city, Shalem. Now, Shalem is peace, meaning it's an important point. It can't just be a city of fire, because if it's a city of fire, you get polarization and machlokas. The Yira, which is the city of reverence and fire, has to be balanced with the city of peace, reconciliation, togetherness, Ava. And similarly, to have a city of peace is not enough. Because with peace can just mean I'm okay, you're okay, I don't stand for anything. So essentially, Yerushalayim kind of requires that we integrate Yira with Shalem. And as I think I said just 2 weeks ago, often in our polarized world, you see that these seem to move in different directions. Because you often find, as a person gets more and more religious, more and more committed, more and more fiery, they become less tolerant and less accepting of people who are not living up to their standards. And the other way around, when people are open, accepting, and loving, it often means, or it may mean, they are not firmly committed to Torah and mitzvahs. Yerushalayim says you got to combine your yira with shalom. Otherwise, your fire turns to be destructive, and your shalom turns into a wishy-washiness that doesn't stand for anything. So the same way as I think I spoke about Lag BaOmer embodies these two contradictory notions of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who is totally connected to Torah, and rectifying the deaths of the students of Rabbi Akiva by seeing the good in others. Right? We talked about two themes in Lag BaOmer. The truth is, you see the very same two themes in the city of Jerusalem itself. And that's our big conflict. Our big conflict is, how do you have shalom in the city of Yira? How do you have Yira in the city of Shalom? Because they move in very, very, very opposite ways. I had mentioned, forgive me for repeating, the pasuk in Zechariah, Ha'emes v'ashalom ehavu. A Jew must love truth and peace. And the Kotzker Rebbe used to say, it's easy to love truth if you don't care about peace. Right? I stand up for the truth. I don't care who I hurt. And it's easy to love peace if you don't care about the truth. If I don't care about the truth, then I'll always be peaceful because I have nothing to fight about. So, some people love truth, and some people love peace. But they wind up hating the other one. The Navi Zechariah B'Shem Hashem says, you got to move in the opposite way. This is not an either-or choice. You must love truth. You must love peace. And you have to find a way to live your truth in a context of shalom. And to live your shalom in a context of truth. Again, this is a hard challenge, but particularly, our society here in Eretz Israel is not even geared to that type of interaction. Because, the Middle Eastern temperament generally, nothing to do with religious and secular, is that I'm right and you're an idiot. That's being kind. I mean, the alternative is you're a mullet, you're whatever, but if I'm being kind, you're just an idiot. And of course, you'll say the same thing about me. Now, where does that get you? That doesn't resolve anything, because that just creates a never-ending cycle of, just going down the pit. So the challenge is to be able to be makir the legitimacy and the good within contradictory viewpoints. And that takes a certain amount of talent, to be able to identify nukudot that might facilitate common ground. I'm not sure if I mentioned this story. I'll give you a little autobiographical story. Many years ago, I had an unusual assignment. I had to debate Alan Dershowitz about something. Now, what was the story? I'll tell you the story because it's kind of cute a little bit. We were at a convention, kind of a rabbinic convention. I think it was a Chabad event, actually. It wasn't rabbinic, but it was a Chabad event, and they wanted to get provocative speakers, so they asked Alan Dershowitz to talk, not about Israel. At that time, things were relatively peaceful, but about religion, because Alan Dershowitz actually came from an Orthodox family, and he left it for a while, so they thought it would be provocative to hear from him. And he was supposed to debate Nat Lewin. I don't know if any of you know who Nat Lewin is. Baruch Hashem, still alive and healthy. He lives here now. He's a very, very famous constitutional lawyer. Also a Talmud Chacham. He himself has smicha. His grandfather was the Reish Rav. So Nat Lewin is a real famous guy. So it was going to be Dershowitz versus Lewin. Two famous people. So Nat got ill right before the Shabbaton. So they needed a last-minute replacement. so they asked me to step in. I was not famous. So the thing was, I actually knew Alan Dershowitz. In fact, I'll tell you my story because I was a student in Harvard Law School and he was a professor. But, he didn't know me. He never heard of me, etc. So I still remember this. I mean, I was kind of embarrassed. He was like so angry that he was debating a pipsqueak. This thing was like this. He was really, really upset. It was not Lefi Chavodo to engage in some debate with me, but I was a last-minute substitute. But I had a maisa about Alan Dershowitz because when I started law school in September 1977, so the first day of orientation, I was wearing a kippah. Alan Dershowitz, who was not wearing a kippah, went over to me and he said, I see you're an Orthodox student. I want you to know if you have any problems with kosher food or any problems with rescheduling exams on Shabbos, just come to me. I will be very, very happy to help you any way that I can because I look after the Jewish students in Harvard. That's my mice with him. So I said, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to debate Alan Dershowitz because he's kind of like my Rebbe. He taught me something. You're not supposed to, argue with your Rebbe. I can tell you that story melted him. You could mamish see physically, his arms were closed up. He relaxed himself and he started joking. And then what happened was, we were debating, he was taking the position that he says he's not like Orthodox Jews. He says he learns the Talmud, but then he uses his own judgments. As opposed to you religious people, you're just automatons. You never do any thinking. Whatever. And I was saying, well, listen, the whole process of learning Torah is we're always thinking. We're thinking and overthinking and overanalyzing, whatever. Anyway, at some point, because he felt validated and respected by someone that he thought might disparage him because he wasn't religious, he started bringing proofs to me. I would be saying a point against him, and he would actually say, but I'll give you some proof to what you're saying. In other words, he became an ally instead of an adversary. Now, I'm not saying this to boast in any way, but the point I'm making is that sometimes the way you get over these unbridgeable differences is by trying to see the validity in the other person's position, at least a little bit. And when the person feels that you're hearing him, then he'll be much more open to hearing you. This is the pasuk in Mishlei that I probably have quoted 1,000 times, but I will say it 1,001 times because it's so important. As water reflects the face that you show it, so the heart, kamayim upon him, kain leifa adam. I look at the water, if I smile at it, I see a smiling face. I frown at it, I see a frowning face. The heart of man reflects back that which I show that person. I show you respect. I show you legitimation. I show you validation. You will see that in me. I show you denigration. I communicate to you that you're a nobody. You're going to feel that way about me. And that's exactly the situation in the typical debating styles we have in this country. And that is why issues of Achdut and Avat Yisrael never get resolved. Now, I know people say, well, we're in time of war. Why are you talking about these secondary issues? The truth is they're not secondary issues. Yeah, it's true. We're in a war for survival and the like. But the truth of the matter is, when there's Achdut and Avat Yisrael, that opens up the gates of heaven. That opens up the gates of Nitzachon. These are not like things, well, let's worry about Achdut when we resolve, the war against Hamas. No, it could very well be that unless we take steps to resolve these Achdut issues, we're not going to solve the war against Hamas. The external enemy will continue until we resolve the enmity within us. So these are not secondary things that you put on the back burner until you resolve the main issue. Fakert, the other way around, that actually is the main issue itself. And that is what Yerushalayim embodies, the two ideas that your growth in Avodat Hashem should not be at the expense of your Shalom and your Avat Yisrael. When October 7, the tragedy of October 7 on Simchat Torah, so that one of the, if we could talk about a silver lining in a very, very dark moment for us was the tremendous unity and togetherness that we did have for quite a while, in which we understood we have a common danger and a common enemy, and we have to come together. We have to care about each other. We have to have an Avat Yisrael, and religious, non-religious, whatever, and it worked in both ways. There were very, very devout Charedim. If they didn't enlist in the army, but at least they were involved in helping soldiers in various ways. And then we have chayalim, who turned to the Torah, turned to the mitzvot, with the tefillin and the tzitzis, the different campaigns. YIBONEH also was involved in running these campaigns. So everybody was meeting each other. The religious were reaching out to the non-religious, and the non-religious were moving towards the religious. And there was a real sense of Achdut and Avat Yisrael. Unfortunately, as things drag on and drag on and drag on interminably, and it's a very, very difficult situation, because we don't really have a clear sense of what is getting resolved. I mean, we know there's a lot of bombing going on. We don't really know, and part of it is it's military intelligence. They're not telling us, but the truth is, a lot of us are in the dark. Are any objectives being accomplished at all? Because the hostages that are not released, and there was an announcement today that 1/3 or more are not alive, and the Hamas manages, like cockroaches, to somehow rejuvenate themselves in all sorts of places. So what does it even mean to have a victory against Hamas? Again, I don't want to get into politics, but these are really, really difficult questions. But what happens is, as the war drags on, and we don't have a clear sense of any type of victory, the unfortunate spiritual malaise is that our sense of unity and achdut is disintegrating in the politics of the situation. And therefore, the very precious treasure that we did acquire in the aftermath of October 7, we're kind of losing. And I think it's really, really important that we find ways that we can recapture it. So maybe, Yom Yerushalayim, the 57th anniversary, is a time that we can contemplate that the physical unification of Jerusalem might be a symbol of the spiritual unification of Yisrael. And that, in turn, actually prepares us in a very beautiful way to the Matan Torah of Shavuos, where when we stood at the foot of Har Sinai, the Torah said we had to be Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Ahor. We had to encamp, and the word Vayichan in Hebrew is singular, so everyone knows the famous drasha, Ki ish echad uvalev echad. We had to stand at the foot of Sinai like one person, like one heart. Kabbalat HaTorah could not have occurred without the unity, without the achdus of Am Yisrael. And therefore, Yom Yerushalayim, in that sense, could also be seen as a preparatory step for Matan Torah itself. By the way, I should also add, there's something else that happened on the 28th of Iyar that people don't always pay attention to. Much, much earlier, it is the yard site of Shmuel Hanavi. Shmuel Hanavi, Chavches Iyar. And Shmuel Hanavi himself was a prophet who the Pasuk compares to Moshe and Aaron. So Shmuel was so unbelievably great. He was Shakul K'Moshe v'Aaron. So let me just tell you a short word in honor of Shmuel Hanavi. We all know the story of Chana. Chana was a woman who was childless for many, many, many years. And she prayed to God for a child. In fact, all the laws of Shmona Esrei, moving your lips without being loud, are derived from Chana's prayer. Chana is the prototype of prayer. Eli HaKohen thought she was drunk, but in fact, she was a saintly woman. So in one of her pleas, according to the Gemara's interpretation, she asked for a very strange thing. She asked Hashem, really, give me mediocre sons. Don't give me a son who's too smart, or too dumb, or too big or too small. Give me somebody right in the middle. to that degree, I think we have to say her prayer was not really answered. She was given Shmuel. But the question is, what does it mean? Does one pray for a mediocrity? I mean, I pray my son shouldn't be too smart, my son shouldn't be too wise. Why would I have such a tefillah? So here's what I would suggest, and this is a key to Shmuel's greatness. She didn't pray that he shouldn't be wise, but she prayed that he shouldn't have a wisdom that takes away his ability to relate to people. Sometimes you can have a genius who kind of is not normal, is not able to connect to people, doesn't understand what they're going through, because he's living in a different world, a different frame of existence. She wanted a son who would be able to connect to every type of person. Don't give him talents that will destroy his ability to connect to the common person. So she wasn't praying intrinsically that he shouldn't have the talents, but she was praying that his talents should not take away his ability to connect. And once again, the message is one of Achdus. You need to have someone, a leader, who can talk to people, who can understand their struggles. I think about this. Rav Steinman, Arvin Steinman, lived in abject poverty. His dibur was essentially a shack, if you saw pictures of it. I mean, nobody would live there. But it didn't bother him or his Rebbetzin because they were perfectly righteous. He didn't care. Like, he lived on a potato and water is what he ate every day. And he even told somebody, this tastes pretty good. You ought to try it. He said to somebody. Now, people would come to him and, they would talk about, should I get a new car? My car is 10 years old. It's almost embarrassing. You're sitting with somebody who's living in a shack and you're talking about, well, I have a car that's 10 years old, but, maybe I should turn it in. And people initially would be they had shilas, but they would be embarrassed to talk about. In fact, sometimes a businessman would say, I have to change cars every 2 years. How do I do it? But the truth of the matter is, people described later that they had no difficulty at all in talking to him about those problems. That even though on one level he was totally removed from that had no connection to his life whatsoever, he understood that some people are connected to that. That is an issue for some people. And he was able to connect to people on the level that they were on. That's a beautiful gift. Psychologists will call that emotional IQ. Right? Some kids might be, not just kids, some people might be academically geniuses, but they don't have an emotional understanding of people. Other kids who are b'dafka not gifted academically can have a very, very high emotional intelligence. So my little chiddush is that when Chana was praying for a mediocrity, she wasn't praying for an actual mediocrity. She was praying for someone who would be able to connect to every type of level of person, because that is what a Manig Yisrael has to be. A Manig Yisrael cannot judge people by his madrega. He has to judge people by their madrega, and then see, are they functioning the best that they can within the particular madrega that they are. So this is in honor of Shmuel Hanavi and Zechusa Yagin Aleinu. So anyway, wish you all a Yom Yerushalayim Sameach and Chag Sameach Shavuos, Yom Kabbalah Satira. May we be Zocha to be Makabel the Torah with enthusiasm, with love, and B'ki'ish Yachad U'V'Lev Echad Mamish. Okay.